if you're able to hear me, then I will hand it over to Michael Hammer, who's there on the ground and ready to take everyone through the presentation that we put together, and the panelists who are ready to share what they've prepared.
So, Mike Hammer, I'm actually wearing my investor hat, not my founder hat today. We didn't do pictures, apologies. And each of the participants will introduce themselves. This is the order that we'll be speaking. So, next slide. When we talk about climate tech, what's really driving it is climate change and the impacts. So some of the recent things that we've been seeing, the heat wave in India and Pakistan, over 120 degrees, they've had 5 recent heat waves, and we can see the impact on the population there. And agriculture, for example, their crops haven't failed, but they've been severely impacted. In California and in Florida, impacts from flooding and heat waves and drought, mega drought, impacts insurance, right? Normally when we talk about climate change, you don't hear people talking about insurance, but how do we manage those risks? What happens when large swaths of area become uninsurable? So that's an impact. If we look at that lower left-hand corner, everybody talks about holding it to 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. It's really starting to look like we're going to miss it. So what happens when we hit 2 degrees increase or larger? So we really need to think broadly. And as we put together this session, one of the things that I realized is climate tech is really hitting a lot of things that we don't think of as traditionally climate tech. Pretty much everything's going to be impacted. So we need to think about that, not just companies that tout themselves as climate tech. Next slide, please. Here we go. Okay, so there's a context, right? When we talk about it, I'm not going to talk about the 3 other waves that preceded it, but when we talk about climate tech, 2 main themes stand out. Decarbonization, how do we change the trajectory, and adaptation. If we miss the targets, what are the things that we're going to have to do to live with climate change? And so there's opportunities here, right? There's risks, there's negative impacts, but from an investment standpoint, it provides opportunities. Next slide, please. And again, when we look under decarbonization, we see various things that are themes that fall within that, and the same thing for adoption. And I'm going through this very quickly because we have such a big topic in a limited amount of time. And when we get to Rick and Sean presenting on actual things that are happening, that's much more interesting than the overview I'm giving. Next slide, please. So we really are boiling the ocean. Here's a handful of the various sectors that we think about when we talk about climate tech, but some of them provide real opportunities. When we look at construction, there's going to be a lot of opportunities beyond like LEED in how we approach things, right? Dealing with the heat, the cold, in various weather conditions. Agriculture, and I own a farm, we do cattle. Regenerative grazing is a topic. And if you want to talk to me offline later about that, I'm more than happy. But construction, if you look at construction of highways and whatnot, the technology hasn't really changed. You haven't seen huge increases in efficiency. So again, opportunities. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Byron to talk about ventures investing.
Can everyone hear me? All right. The good news about venture is that the sentiment has changed since 2012. So there was a green tech bust affected a lot of VC firms, especially those in Boston and Silicon Valley. To the contrast of that, there was over $50 billion of capital that was invested in climate tech startups last year. And that's just due to the broad swath of companies that are addressing climate tech, both directly and many are addressing it indirectly as well. New climate techs, focus funds, and initiatives inside of very large family offices, especially those in Silicon Valley, continue to form. Very famous VC, Chris Sacca, who you may have seen on Shark Tank. He started Lower Carbon and his first fund of $350 billion with a tagline that he likes to use called "Unfucking the World." So there's a lot of capital, a lot of funds actually being raised pretty quickly to address the issues ahead of us. But I think the most exciting thing is that generalist funds are investing, not just because of the double bottom line, which is very important. And I think Tesla really kind of created this business model, but the ability to create really, really attractive businesses that address climate change at the same time due to a host of features. So that means VCs are no longer banking on public policy and government subsidies. Avioko is like an OG double bottom line climate tech investor for years, even during the green tech bubble. You know, I think he made a very correct observation that VCs are investing more money despite the fact that public policy is probably actually going in the wrong direction on average. And I think the other thing I see as a generalist deep tech investor that Seed Invest is that the core technologies behind these companies are way more mature than they were in 2012. So if you take a look at things like biomanufacturing, you don't have the concerns like you had with biodiesel. So you're seeing oxygenation yields, the ability to vertically manufacture these technologies. Solar conversion efficiency is extremely high. New material development, thanks to advancements in omic sciences, have created this ability to create really amazing unit economics, which was missing out of the kind of the last wave of green tech. And then just anecdotally, if you take a look at some of the, as Mark alluded to, we were investing in battery swap technologies, new materials 7-8 years ago. One of the biggest factors, risk factors when we made those investments was there wasn't going to be follow-on capital. Now it's quite off. It's quite the opposite. In fact, I just saw an oversubscribed round and actually surprisingly low sum upcycling startup in VC Armageddon. So that there's a lot of capital out there for these kinds of companies. Oh, I can't control. Can someone go to the next slide for me? Huh? Is that me? There we go. Thank you, whoever did that. And just a quick sampling, there are so many companies that are doing their part in addressing climate tech. Really interesting areas, biomanufacturing. So if you know Ginkgo, Zymergen, Amyris, companies like Manus Bio, they're enabling, they're preventing deforestation from happening at a big level, removing gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere by getting by keeping our forests intact. You have companies that are working on carbon capture and storage, fully recyclable plastic substitutes, and then all of the other things that you're seeing that are happening from the electrification of the grid. I just saw a really amazing company this week from Vanderbilt that was cleaning up downstream from mining, which is becoming a very big factor with all the giant surge for battery materials. Okay, I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Byron. And at this transition point, I'll just add that, the first few minutes that you've just heard was our intention to kind of present a mile wide, inch deep perspective on, what climate tech includes, And now the next two panelists are going to take, what we described as at least a shallow dive into some, specific areas of that. And we hope all this will be good fodder for a great breakout session. So Rick, I think you're there ready to take it away. I'll sign off.
I can't hear myself here yet. Oh, there I am. All right. Well, I'm Rick Stockberger. I'm president and CEO of Bright Energy Innovators. We're the only energy-focused incubator in the state of Ohio. So we work with clean tech companies in Cincinnati, Columbus, all over the region, as well as through Appalachia as well, in Pittsburgh and West Virginia. And so I'm very excited about this opportunity to speak with you all. We're actually in the process of raising a new fund right now. In this talk, real quick, it's going to be less than 5 minutes. I'm going to reference two reports. One's by Jobs Ohio, and one is by Silicon Valley Bank. So next slide. First off, Jobs Ohio put together a comprehensive report on EV supply chain, and specifically in investments necessary for Ohio to remain an automotive powerhouse in the space. I don't know if you guys know this, but about 90% of the supply chain for electric vehicles is in China and Eastern Asia. That's a big issue considering that Ohio is the second largest producer of internal combustion engine components and parts. So we have a big opportunity to lose or a big opportunity to win, especially when almost all OEMs are saying they're going to be producing electric vehicles, some saying only electric vehicles by as soon as 2025 and 2030 at the latest. Next slide. As I said, currently 90% of that supply chain is in Eastern Asia, and so to not rely on foreign markets or supply chains and tariffs, the federal government, under the current and former administrations, guys, this is both last administration and this one, there's been giant investments in energy storage technologies. President Trump did the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. We're seeing what's coming up in infrastructure right now. And so right now there's just a huge opportunity in this space, which gives you a huge opportunity to make or lose a lot of money. And we're looking at Bright specifically, and the federal government and others are looking to de-risk some of these investments as much as we can. Next slide. So there's already large investments going on in Ohio. So I'm from the Mahoning Valley, and we just had Altium invest $2.3 billion into their new EV battery plant. Do you guys remember in Ohio when $2.3 billion was a lot of money before Intel? Making a large investment like that. You guys might have also seen Ford is investing $1.8 billion in Avon Lake factory to produce electric vehicles as well. So there's a huge opportunity here, and we're seeing that move forward, and Ohio being a bigger part of that. And so there's an entire supply chain that goes around vehicle electrification that's extremely important. So per that next slide. So per that report, Jobs Ohio and Benchmarks put together, the most opportunity in Ohio is in cathode active materials investments, which is really just specialty chemicals for the cathodes and anodes that are happening here, and that will support the actual putting together of energy storage products like EV batteries. So from the CAM manufacturing standpoint, there is no large CAM manufacturer in the United States at all. All of this is being done in Eastern Asia for the most part, and some in Europe. So that's something that we can really target as bringing here. And also Ohio, if you guys don't know, already has a very strong specialty chemicals background. So we are very good in this space already. It's a huge opportunity. Next slide. So in addition to just the battery supply chain of electric vehicles, I don't know if you guys also heard Foxconn made a large investment and took over the Lordstown Motors plant, which was previously the GM plant. So where I'm from, we're affectionately calling it Voltage Valley now, just because how much is going on in vehicle electrification, as well as that's my hometown and headquarters of Bright. So when we see that happening and kind of being ground zero in the Midwest alongside Detroit, there's just so much opportunity. And so the Endurance is going to be produced there. We just talked to Heinrich Fisker, and they've closed up the deal on the Fisker Pear being produced there. There are two other platforms that are in play in that space right now that I know of that should be announced in the next month as well. Next slide. And as for EV technology supply chain, obviously there's an opportunity to invest in emerging battery technologies, but there's also plenty going on in the infrastructure space. Once again, there's an epic amount of federal funding coming down for infrastructure right now from the federal government. And that's really, like I said, being used to de-risk. So these are just some of the companies that are in our portfolio right now that are all in the infrastructure space. So mostly EV charging, grid integration companies, microgrid companies. And so all of this is happening, and all of these companies are located in Ohio. Next slide. So I guess my point here is we're on the eve of massive disruption in Ohio on how we transport ourselves and our supplies from place to place. Almost 50, as you guys just heard on the last panel, I mean, 50 countries have committed to net zero, as well as 93 of the Fortune 500 companies. So it's like there's not just a financial impact and opportunity that Byron was talking about, but there is also real money to be made here. And just to reiterate some of those numbers, but in 2020 and 2021, clean tech venture capital investments increased 80%, reaching $56 billion. And there was $114 billion in clean tech exits in 2021. And so that's been a 70% increase year over year at this point. And so this is my shallow dive on this, but it's time to jump in. It's not, this time it isn't a passing fad, just because all of the other clean tech cycles that we've gone through, I think, have prepared us to be where we are, as well as the commitments that are actually being made in business right now. So thank you guys so much. Rick@brite.org, BRITE, if you guys want to get a hold of any of those studies or reach out and talk to about that. So thank you. And I believe Sean is up next. How large is your fund? Ours? So we do not directly have a fund, sorry. So we do not directly have a fund. The new fund that we're raising is going to be 10 million, so small.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Donegan. I'm the president and CEO of a company called Satellytics, based in Perrysburg, Ohio, or as we like to call it, the 751st most visited city in the nation. Next slide, please. We're a software company that uses a very unique type of technology. I've heard already somebody talk about greenwash and oil and gas energy. So we use the power of the sun shining on the Earth's surface, and what reflects into the infrared spectra is a unique spectral signature, whether we're looking at land or water. Our first 3 algorithms were looking at harmful algae blooms on Lake Erie. But not only can we identify things like methane and arsenic and barium and iron and manganese and copper, but we also measure it. Next slide, please. We operate as a software as a service. Today we have over 40 different algorithms that can all run at the same time. Our largest customer in the world is Duke Energy. Our second largest customer is BP, but we've operated in the mining, rail, water, wastewater, oil and gas pipeline, power, both gas and electrical utility space. Next slide. We task satellites from companies like Airbus, Maxar, Satellogic, TripleSat, and we're looking at the reflective signature, and we're solving most of the pressing issues that these entities have, whether we're looking for clean water and its supply, as we've done for Anadarko in Mozambique, or whether we're looking for carbon offset for BP and its calculation of getting to net zero. Next slide, please. Even down to pinhole leaks that are common in local gas distribution. Of course, identifying both the plume of methane and measuring it sets Satellytics aside from every other company all over the world. And that data then can roll up, as you can expect, for and looking at ESG reporting. I'm going to share my screen here. Can somebody let me share my screen? Okay, let me share my screen here. And now what you're going to see is they often say never work with CEOs, animals, or softwares live. But just to sort of illustrate the point to you, is everybody seeing? Are you seeing my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up or that we're seeing it. Thank you. Yeah. So just to give you sort of some idea of how this works. So the data comes in. And if we just take a look at methane being captured over Charlotte, North Carolina, in this particular case. Let me just open this up so we can see it at its maximum. Now, here it is. So now what you're looking at, we've captured the data. Satellitic software then gives to, in this particular case, Duke Energy, where we've got the source of the methane, where you can literally click on any of the area and it will measure in parts per million. The methane, we're accurate to plus or minus 10 parts per million. Every one of these has been fully ground truth, and we even determine the flow rate. Criticality to flow rate is also wind velocity, wind direction, and relative humidity. You can see we've got a little feature called Joule Maps. It lets us look at other locations, and we can measure the same gas plume and the measurement coming from either the plume itself or indeed the actual flow rate and the source of the leak. Duke Energy now say we're in the upper 98.6 percentile of accuracy. And while I think that net zero is a grand scheme, I'm not sure that we will get to net zero. So we also allow our clients, which we also do for the electrical utilities, look at tree speciation from above the Earth's surface. And then just to give you sort of the final look at this, BP has a company called Finite Carbon that does its carbon calculation. We feed a lot of that data, and this is similar work to what we do in the power utilities. But if you click on any one of these 16 meters by 16 meters square, not fully sure as to why it's that measurement, you'll get the tree height, the speciation of every tree anywhere in that square, anywhere on the scene. And what makes this all the more impressive is that no matter what we're solving, literally once we've captured the data, you're looking at the results within 3 to 4 hours. And so that's a snapshot of Satellitic based in Perrysburg, Ohio, where we currently employ just under 40 people, or as we like to call it, the 751st most visited city in the nation, or indeed, I guess, the next Midwest Silicon Valley.
Sean, that was awesome. I know you were moving quickly, but for those of us who are chemically illiterate, could you just provide another level of detail as to kind of why it's important for BP and Duke and anyone else to be measuring these things?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, greenhouse gases and emissions are often become the target of finger pointing on both sides. But what's interesting is much of the data until now was factless. You know, it wasn't based on measurements on the ground. It was based on specifications. So Satellitic as a company, 8 years ago, when we first started this, BP and other early adopters came to us and said, look, we want to be accurate in our measurements. So if you are trying to put in efficiencies and drive down greenhouse gas input, or indeed temperature input in general, it doesn't have to be greenhouse gases, that's one aspect, then you want to be doing it on hard fact measurement. People like Duke Energy, the largest software, the largest utility in the world, they actually don't want to be, they want to get rid of leaks. That obviously is a mission goal for them. So measurement is critical to this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Michael and Mark, I don't know what's next and if there's time for questions in person or if it's time to move on, but I'll let you just pick it up from here. Thanks, everyone.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.